Kawasaki, Japan. There was a putrid smell emanating from the apartment. There was an obvious brown stain on the futon where the body had been. The futon, the clothes, the newspapers and horse racing stubs were covered with maggots and flies. Still, if the man had died in the summer and rotted for months in the sweltering heat, instead of drying to a shrivel as winter approached, it could have been much worse. "I'd say this is a 4 out of 10, said Akira Fujita, leader of the crew from Next, a company that specializes in cleaning up after lonely deaths, where people lie dead in their apartments for long periods before being discovered. Every country has cases where elderly people die alone, but none experiences it quite like Japan, home to the world's fastest aging population. More than a quarter of the population is over 65, a figure set to rise to 40% by 2050. Lonely death statistics are hard to come by. The central government doesn't collect them, but regional figures show a sharp increase over the past decade. NLI Research Institute, a Tokyo think tank, estimates that about 30,000 people nationwide die this way each year. The small apartment was full of instant noodle bowls, soft drink bottles and empty cans of coffee. As the number of lonely deaths has grown, so too has the lonely death cleanup industry. Numerous firms offer this kind of service, and insurance companies have started selling policies to protect landlords if the tenants die inside the properties. The plans cover the cost of cleaning the apartment and compensate for loss of rent. Some will even pay for a purifying ritual in the apartment once the work is done. The owner of this apartment in Kawasaki, south of Tokyo, didn't appear to have any such insurance, so was paying next $2,250 to make the tiny studio apartment rentable again. The tenant, a 54-year-old man named Hiroki, had fallen several months behind on his rent, so a representative from the real estate management company went by to see what was happening. The Post agreed to withhold the deceased man's surname, at the request of the cleaning company, to respect his privacy. When the representative opened the door, he found Hiroki lying dead on the futon. He had probably been there for about 4 months. His body, the futon and floor around it were completely dry. Although there were flies and maggots everywhere, the smell hadn't been bad enough to bother neighbors at the convenience store directly below. After the body was removed, the management company called Next. The 4-man cleaning crew led by Fujita arrived with an empty truck and full body protective wear. Akira Fujita is the supervisor of a crew from Next, a company that specializes in cleaning up after lonely deaths. Fujita lifts the futon where Hiroki's body was found. The Post agreed to withhold his last name to respect his privacy. Dead flies littered Hiroki's apartment, which the cleaners would empty and disinfect. Akira Fujita, the supervisor of a crew that specializes in cleaning up after lonely deaths, prepares to enter the apartment where Hiroki was found. Dead flies littered the home, which a crew would empty and disinfect. Fujita lifts the futon where Hiroki's body had lain for about 4 months. The Post agreed to withhold Hiroki's last name to respect his privacy. The first thing they removed was the futon, which was covered with brown residue and maggots and was the main source of the smell. It was vacuum-packed into a plastic bag and carted off to the truck. The men approached the work in a nonsense way, not wrinkling up their noses or commenting on the squalor, just getting on with the job. The 200-square-foot apartment was overflowing with the detritus of a lonely life: instant noodle bowls and soft drink bottles, empty cans of coffee, cigarette butts in ashtrays, dozens of lighters, months' worth of newspapers, clothes in disheveled piles. The men filled garbage bag after garbage bag. Utility bills and other papers were stuck to the floor with dried bodily fluids, so one of the men had to use a dustpan to chip them off. The tiny bathroom was covered with black mold, the walls, the basin, inside the toilet, everything. Unidentified grime covered the doors and the kitchen sink, and all required industrial-strength cleaning liquid. After removing all of Hiroki's belongings, the crew got to work stripping the wallpaper and figuring out how much of the flooring they would have to pull up. A crew from Next examines the floor for bodily fluids. The growing number of lonely deaths is the result of Japan's aging society and changes in family structures. More people remain single and couples are having fewer, if any, children. The paperwork showed Hiroki was 54 and divorced. He had worked as a systems engineer for 20 years, including spells at big companies such as Nissan and Fujitsu. But he was always in contract positions, meaning that he had no benefits and needed welfare to supplement his low income. Passport photos he'd had taken to apply for jobs show an entirely ordinary-looking man, grey hair parted in the middle, wire-frame glasses, checked shirt. There were photo albums, but none seemed to contain pictures of Hiroki. The cleaning company did not know how or why Hiroki died at this relatively young age, but his apartment was full of prescription medicines. Local newspapers in Japan are full of reports of these kinds of solitary deaths. Usually men, usually elderly, they're discovered often months after they've died, after the mailboxes fill up. Or they fall behind on the rent, or odors start creeping out from their apartments. There have been reports of people in their 40s dying alone, too. Hiroki's 200-square-foot apartment was overflowing with the detritus of a lonely life, including dozens of betting slips for horse racing. This growing phenomenon is the result of Japan's aging society and changes in family structures. Three-generation households were commonplace not so long ago. Now more Japanese are remaining single, while couples are having fewer, if any, children. The general concept of family in Japan has fallen apart, said Masaki Ichinos, part of the Center for Life and Death Studies at the University of Tokyo. The overall number of people who are alone is growing, so it's inevitable that the number of people dying without anyone's support is also growing. Older men are particularly susceptible because of pride and an unwillingness to ask for help, Ichinos said. They retire from lifetime jobs and lose the only communities they've ever really had.